Hello everybody, today I'm going to lay out 4 tips for saxophonists at 3 different levels of learning: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Now I suggest listening to all the tips of all levels, regardless of what your level of learning is, because you may find something to look forward to, or maybe something in the others that you've neglected. To start off, here's 4 tips for beginner level saxophonists. Now for the first, it's about reed and ligature placement on your mouthpiece. This one can be a little tricky sometimes, but once you get the muscle memory for it, it comes pretty quickly. Now the key is to make sure that the mouthpiece tip aligns with the tip of the reed, just like that. When you face it this way, you don't see any of the mouthpiece. When you face it this way, you can slightly see a little bit of the reed. Just like that. Doing this will ensure that the reed can vibrate in the right space and produce the best sound. Now the second is actually about the ligature and where that is placed on the mouthpiece. And most mouthpieces actually have a little line that goes across it right there. Now that's where you want to line your ligature up with on your mouthpiece. So once you get the reed in place and set, you can slide the ligature down to where it meets with that line and then tighten it up. And then you've got the perfect reed and ligature set up on your mouthpiece. Tip number 2 is actually for different embouchure types, depending on whether you're trying to play classical or jazz saxophone. We'll start with the classical because you can build the jazz one off of that. Now the key here is going to be in your bottom lip. And you can actually do this with your index finger or any finger. Take your finger and roll your bottom lip over your teeth. Well over your teeth. So that way the top of your teeth is lined up about right here, just underneath where the color of your lip meets the color of your skin. And that spot right there is where your bottom lip will rest. And so now you can do that with the mouthpiece. And close the rest of your mouth around it with your bottom lip in that same position. And that is your classical saxophone embouchure. Now for the jazz embouchure, we're basically going to take that embouchure and loosen it up a little bit. So start at that same position and then just roll your lip out a little bit more. Yes. So you can start to see a little bit of the pink right here of my lip. That's the goal. Just gonna loosen it up right there. So the top of your teeth will rest right about there, underneath your lip. And then set the mouthpiece in with your bottom lip right in that same position. And close the rest of your mouth around it. And that is your jazz saxophone embouchure. Tip number 3 is to make sure to keep your fingers near the keys. Now, whenever you're playing, you have your fingers here on the keys. And when you press down, you play the note. Now when you're done, you want to lift your fingers off to get a different note out. But instead of letting your fingers fly off the keys like this, try and keep your fingers right up next to the keys, just like this. Now this can take a little bit of getting used to, but it is essential for if you want to play stuff that is faster or that requires a more dexterous technique. It will allow you to get your fingers quicker because of the distance your fingers will have to travel is less. And the last tip that I have for beginners is transcribing. Now this is mostly for the jazz heads out there, but transcribing. At this level, it might be difficult to learn things by ear, but it's important to start somewhere. The best way to improve is to challenge yourself and play things you never have before and things that are difficult for you to play. If you always sound good, you're not really growing. So focus on just getting the notes down and learn something new. Now for the intermediate tips. For the first one, it's about improving your tone and an exercise you can do to practice to improve it. And that is using and playing on your mouthpiece alone. Now this is a little bit difficult and it's going to be hard to get a dead-on note, especially when you first start. But the target goal is to get an A, a concert A, out of your mouthpiece. And like I said, it will be difficult for you to get a dead-on pitch and be able to hold that, especially when you first start. So the goal is actually to take your tuner. See, I have mine right here, and it shows a little indicator right here for plus and minus 20 cents, sharp and flat. Now the goal is to keep your mouthpiece pitch at an A in between that interval. And again, after you've practiced it and work really hard at that, you can try and get it to be as dead on an A and in tune. If you can manage the tone fluctuations on the mouthpiece, then it will drastically improve your control over the instrument's tone and intonation. Tip number 2 is about alternate fingerings. Now most fingering charts will give you most likely one possible fingering for each note on the instrument. Now some notes actually have alternate fingerings for you to be able to use. B flat, for instance, has 3 that I mainly use whenever I'm playing. And these alternate fingerings, by learning them, will allow you to play more dexterously over the instrument, because some fingerings are better in some situations than others. Now some alternate fingerings actually produce different tones and intonations, and that can allow you to change the pitch. Maybe one is more in tune than the other, or maybe you're trying to get a different sound out of that note at that given time. And by knowing those will allow you to be able to use those at any given time. My third tip is for tonguing, and it's about where to tongue and how. Now the key with tonguing is to tongue and try to tongue with your tongue to touch just the tip of the reed, like so. You don't want to tongue down here in the middle of the reed. You want to be right up here at the tip. And you want to use the tip of your tongue to the tip of the reed. That will allow you to produce the best tonguing sound. And now for speed, it's about how you tongue. You want to try and move your tongue as little as possible. So just try and flex just the tip of the tongue to the tip of the reed with as little motion as possible, and that will allow you to produce a faster tonguing. And it's similar to keeping your fingers close to the keys. The amount of motion that your tongue has to go through to tongue will increase the speed at which you'll be able to go if you reduce the amount of movement it has to go through. And tip number 4 is also about transcribing. Now I know I covered this in beginner topics, but we're going to go a little bit deeper on this one, and transcribing is really important. And for this one, at some point we have to go beyond just the notes. I want you to try and memorize the solos. Play them without writing them down. Learn them without writing them down. This will allow you to commit these solos to muscle memory. This skill and being able to do this will allow you to internalize the music even more and be able to internalize all of the things that this solo has to offer, and it will set you up nicely to be able to move on to the next step in the level of transcribing, which I will cover in the advanced tips. Speaking of advanced tips, let's begin those with tip number 1. Now, a lot of people will tell you to stop playing with backing tracks. I'm not about to do that. I play with them all the time. However, we need to go a little bit deeper than that. I want you to try and start playing changes to your favorite tunes and melodies with just the metronome. You can start by playing with the metronome on just beats 2 and 4, or all 4 beats if you really need it, and slowly work your way to moving on to playing with the metronome on just beat 4. This will force you to be responsible for the changes on your own without the rhythm section. This will also help you to improve your time feel and your groove as well. You'll largely be responsible for keeping the time yourself whenever you learn to play with the metronome on just beat 4, because there's nothing playing along with you anymore. So you've got to really ingrain that time into yourself to be able to stay with that metronome. By learning to do this, it's a different challenge that backing tracks don't really present for you, and it will drastically improve your ability to play along with changes when the rhythm section is playing with you. And tip number 2 is about scales. And again, I know this is a pretty rudimentary topic. We learn this at beginner level. But again, we can go deeper than that. When learning scales, often you learn to go just straight up and down your instrument on any given scale. But there's more that we can do. We can play scales in thirds, fourths, fifths, and a bunch of different permutations that come along with those, as well as arpeggiations, and much more. By doing this, you'll allow yourself to be able to play any given note in any order and feel comfortable doing it. And that is the key to being able to improve your technique, being able to flow across chord changes, being able to play etudes at amazing speeds. And it all comes from just learning your scales. Tip number 3, learn the piano. Now, I'm not asking you to become a master and be able to get called for gigs on piano. What I mean is to be able to learn the piano enough to play chords for yourself. You'll be able to hear chord changes better if you're able to play them for yourself and be able to move through them by yourself on piano. As well, by learning piano, you can play a chord, use a sustain pedal, and then get your instrument and play over that chord. This will allow you to figure out some new sounds and new ways to play over different chords, and it will also improve your ears and creativity as well. And lastly, tip number 4, you guessed it, is about transcribing. At this stage, note, inflection, everything about a solo matters. We're looking at everything. Intonation, dynamics, phrasing, articulation, intent. Everything about a solo we need to focus on at this point. The key is to go slowly and incrementally through solos, figuring out small chunks and getting them to be exactly as you hear them in the recording. Now, this isn't about just being able to play like Cannonball, being able to play like Stitt. It's more than that. It's about expanding what you're capable of, the knowledge and ideas that you possess, and figuring out what, if even, you want to bring into your own sound and playing. And I have one final tip for everyone. It's have fun playing. If you get frustrated with yourself and your playing, just take a step back and play something fun for yourself. It's important to struggle in pursuit of growth, but remember, we all love to do this, and that's why we're doing it to begin with, and never let that get away from you. Well, that's all the tips I have for now. If you're interested in learning more about music, saxophone, improvisation, etc., please consider subscribing or contact me directly and we can look to set up some private lessons. And if you would like to try and support in other ways, you can look for my Patreon link down in the description. Thank you all for watching and happy practicing.